Good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to be sitting down here. So if you cannot see us well, welcome to sit more in the front so we can have a bit more like intimate dialogue and conversation. So welcome to move towards the front. Yeah, people are moving. Great. Wonderful. Great. I can see we actually have quite a lot of people, huh? Considering we have several breakout rooms. So continuing from this morning's conversation, this is a breakout room to discuss the experience in victim identification, rescue, and care for survivors of online scamming. So I believe many of you here either working in combating online scamming or are interested in entering this field. And today we have three really amazing speakers who full of a direct experience, have been doing amazing work in the last few years. And we spoke over the lunch, and actually some of us also know each other for a while already. Like their work is just simply amazing. So I'm really excited to be able to moderate today's session. And the way we're going to structure this is going to be three of the speakers will each have around 10 minutes to talk a little bit about their experience. And then afterwards, we'll jump into a bit more like spicy conversation. I know that the session today is recorded, but we're still going to cover some of the really kind of difficult situations that really face that when we are serving survivors directly. So first of all, I would like to welcome Thuy, who's from Blue Dragon Foundation in Vietnam, and she has years of really exciting experience in community development. So Thuy, would you like to go ahead first? Whichever way you like.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for giving me a chance to say with you our work. So this year is a special year to us in Blue Dragon when we mark the 20 years working in anti-human trafficking. So today I would like to share with you, sorry, hi, over here. Yeah, sorry, yeah. So today I'd like to share with you that our experience in working with the victim, especially who coming back from the scam compound. So my presentation today will share with you three things. That the first, that who are the victim, and especially the victim from scam compound that Blue Dragon has assisted. The second thing that about the recent change in terms of law that I really was inspired with Nina sharing this morning. Also, she mentioned about the recent change in terms of legislation in the countries. And the last thing is about that how Blue Dragon provide the care for the survivor. So let's go to the first question, that who are the victims that we are working in Vietnam. Sorry, it's doesn't work. Sorry, up to now that we have been working with 2,500 survivors from different backgrounds, and women are still account for the majority. And total number of the survivors coming back from China is still, well, last year's number higher than total number of the survivors coming back from different countries. But in the coming slide, I would like to share with you how the change of the trafficking pattern have been seeping in over the 20 years that based on our experience. Sorry that the slide doesn't work. So over 20 years based on our experience working on the field with the number of the victims coming back to the Vietnam, that we have seen that the pattern of trafficking had been shifting from the child labor trafficking to more complex pattern, and now from the forced marriage to forced surrogacy or baby selling, and now it's a more complex case of the human trafficking to scam compound. We do there's some research about the number of the victims during. Oh, sorry, that is clearer. Yeah. So we do some research about the number of the victims that we're working with, and we see that the change happened around the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, that we see that dramatic change before and after the COVID time. So in my presentation, I do the comparison between that the two major times. Yes, can you go? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so here there's some statistic that's just remind that the statistics based on the number of the victims that Blue Dragon has working with. So you can see that before the COVID, the majority of the victims, they coming from China, but after the COVID, we're seeing that the more destination, more country, and the percentage of the victim coming back from China dropped down to approximately to 60%. And by starting of the 2022, Blue Dragon started to receiving the call for help from the people who were trapped in the scam compound. And since then, the number of the call for help is increasing. And 2023, we have assisted for more than 100 people escaping from this compound. And among the victims that we work with, we see the differences in terms of gender. So before the COVID, that the male victim represented only 7%. But after the COVID, especially in 2022 onwards, the male victim represented up to the 40%. And here the number that of the first half of this year, as you can see that the new hotspots of the Vietnamese survivor is Myanmar and Cambodia. And in the first 6 months of 2024, we are able to support for 89 survivors of human trafficking coming back from the camp compound. And the male victim is represented for 80%, and 19% for the female victim, and 1% for transgender. And this year also, that's the first time that Blue Dragon able to provide the support for the transgender victim. Based on the data of the victim that we're working with, we are able to draw out some trait of the scam victim. So first of all, that majority of them coming from the ethnic minority group in Vietnam, and especially that Hmong people occupy the most. So sorry, can you go back to the previous slide, please? Yes. Yeah, thank you. So the first trait of the victim from scam compound, they are from the ethnic minority group. Among that, Hmong occupy the 33%. And the second trait that they are all from the remote area where they face a challenge in accessing the information of anti-human trafficking, and they lack the good preparation prior their departure to overseas or prior to the job offers online. And the third trait, we see that in the context of the Vietnam society is a hierarchical society, that the male victim is more challenging for them to recognize themselves as the victim of human trafficking, because in the society that they define the man in the family as the breadwinner and the role model for the other family to follow. So it's the reason why that recognize themselves as a victim is somehow they feel that they will remove all the family reputation. And the fourth trait that many of them face a big debt when they coming back, so it prevents them to accept that the recovery periods. So many of them that just want to get job as soon as possible. And the fifth trait is very important, that many of them are unwilling to disclose their experience when they was in scam compound. Besides the trauma, besides the psychology issue, many of them concerned that during the time at the scam compound, they were forced into the criminal activity, and they fear that when they come back, they maybe face a revenge from the family of the victim, or being prosecuted by the government. So the next slide, I would like to share with you about the recent change of law in Vietnam. So the TIP law in Vietnam is issued first in 2011, where it's focused to provide the support for the victim. The first that the victim only, and the victim coming from the poor household, and they focus on the victims who stay in the state center, and all the healthcare and psychology will be supported at the center. But in the draft new TIP law that recently led, the country have prepared and consulted with the relevant department and organization that to prepare the fifth of the draft law, and it's being discussed as a National Assembly in May, and we're looking forward that the final version will be approved and come to effect in the middle of next year. And I will show you the major change of the new TIP law. That the first, that the support according to the law is not only limited to the victim human trafficking, but also for the people in the former process of identification. The second thing that is poverty is no longer the criteria, so the victim can come from the alternative poor or normal family. And the third thing, that based on the situation that many victims just want to go back home as soon as possible. So the law now allows that healthcare and psychology service are able to at their hometown. And as I mentioned before, that 60% of the survivors coming back as from ethnic minority group. It means that many of them can't communicate in Vietnamese, so the translation cost is added to help them. And the last and very important point of the new TIP law, that in some specific case, for the victim who are forced to commit the illegal acts may not be sanctioned. So the last section that I would like to share about that how we work with the government and community to provide the care. Yesterday and this morning, I have a chance to meet and talk with many of you, and I understand that you all have experience working and provide the care for the survivor. And today I just presented the model that we have been piloted and implemented in Vietnam since 2018. And we call that is a community-based case management. So this model is to focus on how to help the survivor who not staying in the center but staying in the community, and how to mobilize the local resources, the government resources into supporting the victim. And they will focus on the recovery, reintegration, and helping the survivor to build a new life. The principle of the system is that first, the protection and confidentiality, empowerment, not dependency, respect, not pity, respect the survivor beliefs and culture, and non-judgment. And here you can see that how the system works, that we involve the relevant government department involved into the model, which include us, for example, like social work center, department social welfare, women union, and local authority. And we also take advantage of the grassroots level of the local social worker and village leader in the model. So they will be able to provide the support, to provide the follow-up with the survivor in the community. And here there's some kind of support, and many support can be mobilized from the local resources. Yes, further quickly, that similar to many organizations that we all go to the essential step, like doing the assessment, have a plan for the survivor, maintain the regular visits, strengthen the social worker skill, and connect to the internal and external resources. And the last slide that I would like to emphasize about that how we maintain the system sustainably, that I would like to focus on three things. That the first is the community-based case management is established and managed by the government and community. And second thing that Blue Dragon, we have to provide the training, and we design the training material carefully to match with the capacity of the people who working at the grassroots level. And the last thing that build up the local trainer so they can have capacity to expand the model and provide the support for the new social worker. So that go to the end of my presentation. If you would like to know more about information, you can go to the Blue Dragon website. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much, Thuy. That was really comprehensive to talk a bit about Blue Dragon's work, and I think it's very great also to mention that cultural elements of, for example, the stigmas that male victims may face, and also the new tip law, all the improvements. Now I would like to introduce Judah Tana, and who has 20 years experience in actually working around Thailand and Myanmar border, and has been doing some really, really amazing work in frontline rescuing. I will consider him as one of the biggest expert in this field, particularly when it comes to Myanmar, that actually have all the access. So Judah, yes, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mina. That's it's a big call. Yeah, we're supposed to speak today on the experiences in victim identification, rescue, and care for survivors of online scamming. I never want to repeat too often what we already know, but I'm learning the more that I speak to crowds wherever we are, there's so much still that's unknown about the victims that are coming specifically from scam centers. When I talk today, I will talk specifically on Thailand and Myanmar. It obviously is happening along the Mekong region, which does include some statistics that we work with, but my expertise would be in the region of the Myanmar scam centers and then how that involves Thailand as a transit country. Less on what's happening in Laos and Cambodia, although we do understand what's happening and we do have our finger on the pulse. We rely on organizations like Blue Dragon in those regions to facilitate for their areas. To give you some background, I come from Global Advance Projects in Thailand, or globaladvanceprojects.org is our organization. I don't have a fun slide. Where's my fun slide? No, I don't have one. But just pretend my name's up there. We didn't start as a human trafficking organization. We actually started under the umbrella of Help Save the Kids, which I founded. And we mostly worked within Myanmar in order to prevent child soldiers and to rescue child soldiers from the militia military groups by providing aid, assistance, medical care, and education to the marginalized communities. And through that, we were able to prevent young boys going into the soldier camps, and we were able to prevent young girls from being sold to larger cities in neighboring countries, or for them to be in forced labor. So that was what we were really a part of for a long time, and as Mina said, about 20 years on the border of Myanmar and Thailand. And so it gave me some insight on the happenings of that area. I actually have an adopted son from Myanmar, and I still have land and property in one of the most notorious areas known as Shwe Koko, which some of you might have heard of. And so when in 2022, when we were sitting around my dinner table, we received a text message, or my friend received a message that was from a victim from Kenya inside the scam compound. And truly nobody on the border knew anything about it. There was no other NGO that was in that realm that was working within the cyber scam areas that we could call upon. And so I started to look into it, and because of some of the relationships that I had kept for the last 20 years, we were able to negotiate the release of the first 7 Kenyans out of the scam compound. And that was really the beginning of how I was thrust into it in 2022. And very quickly I learned that there was a growing number of victims coming into the scam compounds. The UN states that this is the largest human trafficking event in history. There is more than 400,000 human trafficking persons that have been moved to the Mekong region over the last 2 years, which is significant. It's something that I don't think anyone in this world was prepared for. There wasn't a country that saw this coming and thought they could preempt it. There was not, even within those who were working in that region, could not have imagined what it was going to become. I watched these buildings be built from the ground up. I watched the grounds being leveled, and we did not have any idea of what this was going to become. So when we got thrust into it, very quickly my phone number was shared throughout the compounds, and I would have daily hundreds and hundreds of victims reaching out to me. And I would talk for them for weeks or days, weeks, months, trying to either negotiate their release or figuring out a way in which they can either escape or we can intercept during their movements when they move from one compound to the other. And so we became very operational in that sphere, in that space. And because of our contact with victims personally inside the compound, we became known as the experts in the region, having resources and information that nobody else had, including law enforcement, including international communities. So a lot of governments started to reach out and require help from our organization for the victims. So experience in victim identification. One thing that we learnt very quickly was that the victims inside the scam compounds are unlike victims that we previously have had experiences over the last decades in what human trafficking looked like. The victims that we started to have out of the scam compounds were, they carried, university degrees, masters, doctorates. They were highly educated. The reason being is the scam compounds focused on hiring very well-talented people that would be able to develop the most sophisticated systems in AI technologies that the world has ever seen. Taiwan has done a great deal of investigation in this, and the universal community has agreed that the scam compounds are more than 2 years advanced in their AI technology and in their computing abilities, capabilities, than what any other country has in their scope. And so the world is caught behind what is happening inside these scam compounds. And I've known personally the victims who have been called to go there, and they're engineers in computer science, and they developed the AI. And what they came out and said to me is, I've never ever touched technology like this before. And we were able to order anything we wanted. There was no limit to what we could do, and all we had to do was just keep providing and providing. But the problem was, and one specific victim that I can share her story, was that if she didn't work, men were brought into her room and they were beaten and killed in front of her, and she was told it was her fault for their death that day. And that caused her to continue to go to work. And when we brought about a plan to have her rescued, she said, I can't be rescued because they'll all be killed. And so it becomes a struggle of victim identification. She went in, obviously, a victim of human trafficking, yet she became almost complicit to the job, unwilling to leave because of the confinement in which they put her, the parameters that they put around her. The responsibility of the survival of everyone in her team was her own. And so she thought, if I was rescued, everyone else would die. And so it became quite a struggle at the beginning to really understand who was. So as an organization, we take the stand that 100% of people coming out of these scam compounds are victims. No matter if they were abused or not abused, no matter if they didn't make money or they did make money, 100% of people coming out of these victims are considered human trafficking victims and should be treated that way, should be treated accordingly. As an NGO working in this space, I don't find it my job in order to figure out prosecution, who's guilty, not guilty. My job is to provide the best care possible for those victims of human trafficking. And through the years that I've worked, and through the people that we've had through our center, we've almost numbered 700 people since the first group came out that we personally have contact with, that we've provided aid for, and many hundreds more than that that I've texted and messaged and seen them get home but not physically had to make contact with. As an organization, we provide 24-hour to 72-hour care. During that time, we are the first responders on the ground, the first people that the victims meet when we're picking them up. And it can be running after cars and pulling them out at traffic lights, or it can be negotiating safe smuggling where they'll be landing in Thailand, or where we'll be picking them up in different locations or meeting them at a drop site. And so we provide them with care in which to build them to a place that they are able to take the next steps. They've come from a system that takes away every single right they've ever had, and every single decision they've ever had to make. It gets taken away, and they're given to a place where when they come out, they're faced with, and this is in Thailand, they're faced with either I'm off my mark now. I have to hurry up. So, so victim identification. So they're faced with either legal prosecution as immigration violators, or going through a very lengthy national referral mechanism and being proven that they're victims of human trafficking. Most of these people don't want to stay in shelters for 30 to 45 days after they've been rescued. They want to go home. And so this is a problem within the system that we're trying to fix. And unfortunately, one of the issues that we have is that this is in a unique place in a country that the Myanmar government have no rights over an area that is governed by a militia military, and Thailand has no right to step over into that country. It would be an act of war. And so they rely on NGOs, and there is only 3 of us operationally in the field that actually work actively every single day to try to rescue people out of these compounds. We have had over 60 countries come to us and ask for support because they too are not allowed to cross that border. Because of the international rules of law, you cannot have governments stepping over. Even in conversation, governments are not allowed to speak to the militia military because it gives them legitimacy. They're not allowed to give legitimacy to the people that are controlling hundreds of thousands of lives. It relies on the NGOs. And so we're put in this position of having to rescue, having to work with them for 24 to 72 hours to give them hope to either go to prison or go to a national referral mechanism, and then we take them and eventually help to repatriate them home. And this is the big topic that I'm trying to hit on while we're all together: aftercare. We have basically 0 aftercare in 60 nations around this world, and I know the aftercare has to belong to the NGOs. It's not going to belong to the governments. And so it's something that we need to network and partner with in order to see that there is aftercare provided to these victims. 100% of them are victims, no matter if they were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for their complicit work, because I can guarantee you they didn't think they were agreeing to be locked up in a dungeon or to be tortured and tasered and beaten every single day to work for that money. And so it's important that we see and we identify them in that way. So my time is up and I'll pass it over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judah, for that very, I don't even know how to describe it. It's so in-depth and so exciting, but also so horrifying talk. Thank you for that. That's the reason why I say later we will have some more spicy conversation. Now, let me welcome also our final speaker, Peerasin and Chatchawarat. So, sorry about, Peerasin. So, Peerasin is the aftercare manager for A21. Last year, I have also met A21 in this conference, and it was just really amazing to learn about A21's work. And Peerasin is leading a multi-talent team now, doing a holistic way of aftercare support for survivors of human trafficking. Peerasin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mina. So I'm very interested in the spicy conversation that we have alluded to. So I think what I'll do is I'll give you a brief overview of A21's work, and then I guess we'll go into the conversations. So A21 is an international nonprofit organization addressing human trafficking. We do anti-human trafficking in 3 ways. We do intervention with our REACH program. Sorry, we do, it's not intervention, it's prevention. Thank you so much. Prevention with our REACH program, intervention with our recover programs, and we provide aftercare services with Restore. So with our REACH program, we go into communities and provide awareness and training to community leaders as well as other demographic groups such as students and frontline professionals who are likely to encounter human trafficking situations. For our Recover program, we provide we work with multidisciplinary teams with government like law enforcement as well as social services in conducting victim identification services. And we also provide professional trainings to frontline professionals like law enforcement and prosecutors. We also have a child advocacy center program as well in Thailand and in Cambodia, which is a program that focuses on child forensic interviews as well as child-friendly services for victims of child abuse or child trafficking. For our aftercare program, we serve a diverse group of survivors of trafficking after they have come out of trafficking situation. We're trauma-informed care, and we provide a holistic aftercare services.
Thank you so much, Peerasin. So the way we're going to do this is that we're going to have some Q&A here, and we're going to let the conversation just flow. Also, at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. But also, if you do have any burning questions, feel free to just raise your hand and jump into the conversation. So I think the first question is, because this issue is so new and we are facing almost kind of like emergency setting. So one question when it comes to confidentialities and balance with, let's say, the danger the survivor is facing, somebody who's like really in need of support at the moment. How do you, as an organization, face those situations? Because I know all of you have involved to a certain degree frontline rescue or let's say liaising with between different organizations. How do you balance that confidentialities and the danger the survivor is facing?
Okay, so in providing aftercare services, confidentiality is important. However, there are certain situations where the safety of the person that we're trying to help becomes a priority, and confidentiality has to be compromised. This is something that's somewhat sensitive to navigate and can be difficult to navigate. But coming from a mental health background, it's almost similar to when someone's about to engage in self-harm or is in a situation or a condition where they're about to hurt themselves or others. So when we're working with victims of trafficking who is in that crisis stage, whether they're reaching out for help or actively in a trafficking situation, and we require collaboration with law enforcement or other agencies, we do need to share information that is relevant to the situation, and oftentimes that includes names and identifying information, the information of the current situation that they're in. And then after that, once they have come out of the trafficking situation, that's when we are more actively protecting sensitive information or private information, if that makes sense.
To add to that, so if you consider it kind of like a medical thing, like you go and see a doctor and then a doctor is going to perhaps go to one of his colleagues to ask, and share a little bit about the case that is before him, to ask for a second opinion. What we find in some of the organizations, we're so taught by culture to keep our cards so close to our chest and only give out a little bit of information here and there. In terms of the human trafficking for forced criminality, we have to look at both the security of the victim inside the center, but our own personal security. And as an organization that is requested by so many other NGOs or government groups to assist them, it is not helpful or secure for us to only have half the story or only half the communication or network. It's very impossible for us to operate if the victim's phone numbers are not given to us while they're inside the compound, because obviously if it's through third party, time is of the essence, and it makes it very, very complicated. So what we find is that there's a lot of NGOs, and some of you might be those NGOs that actually have victims of human trafficking in the forced criminality scam compounds that have reached out to your organizations, and you don't know what to do with that information. We are the type of NGO that you would share that information. You would pass over their name, their contact details, and any kind of information that you have in order that we can work operationally to get them out. Understanding that we're not going to share their information past us. There is still not a confidentiality breach because you're expecting us to remain confidential at the same time. And so it is an agreement between network agencies that we would maintain confidentiality, but we are still inside the same scope. So to look at it as not that your NGO and our NGO is different, that we are a connected network trying to help the forced criminality and the human trafficking side. And so because we are a connected network, you're sharing the information between the network. So it is not necessarily a conflict of confidentiality.
I think then the following kind of continuing this conversation is about the element of trust. Because sometimes, of course, when the victim reach out for help, saying, okay, I'm being exploited, I need help, very often that trust can be building in, let's say, the first contact that the victim found. And sometimes to pass that trust is not necessarily very easy. Or for example, even trust building when the victim and survivor already back to their community. How do you navigate that element around trust? And when do you say, like, this is the time to build it, or not to kind of refrain from having that deeper bond with the survivor or victim?
So regarding the building the trust, I would like to share about this. When we have the survivor to start their reintegration, we try to take advantage of that to find the people who share the same culture. They understand well the survivor background, that they can share what is the belief, the same belief, so they can start to build the trust. And many survivors that when they first arrive, coming back, they stay in the Blue Dragon shelter, and they can stay for more than 3 months, 6 months, and many cases that we provide support over the years that to build the trust again, because many of them still have a doubt about it. It's a free support that I could receive that. So we have to build a long-term support for the survivor, that first how to help them to being listened, being accepted, being confident, and then when coming back to the community, that we try to educate the community as well, to view that there's a trust about that when the victim coming back home, there's not the people at the community used to think, because in Vietnam there's the thought that you're lazy, you like to get a free job, you like to get an easy job. So that's the reason why you are being following the human trafficking. So we have to educate the community about that, the fact that, as you mentioned, that many survivors are highly educated people. So the survivors coming back is not the best person at people thought, to build the trust again and to relationship, the connection again between the survivor and community.
I also view it from kind of the rescue aspect. So, and Mina and I were talking about it over lunch. for us, the trust that we get is either from referrals, so other victims that we've got out, then they've messaged friends that are still within the compound. They say, this is the guy that's going to be able to help you, this is the NGO that can support you. That builds trust. And another way is if we've had groups that have reached out, so to give an example, that might reach out to HRC. If HRC were to respond often to that victim, they would become very interesting in that one organization. That organization is not operational on the ground where the victim is, we are. And so what we've found is then if the victim is handed to us too late, that means that they're always wanting to go back to HRC for reference. And because of their trauma, because of the way psychology works, they've mirrored themselves to one person, the person that first responded. And so as organizations, I think, take that into your mind, take that into heart, that sometimes you might think you're being good-willed by chatting with these people, understanding their systems, understanding what they're going through, but when you hand them off, you've already made a connection that's too deep, and it's too hard for them to build the trust in the second relationship. So I think for me, think about it in that concept as well. I think what Lou said was perfect in terms of how we view it for aftercare and how we view it for that. But also from just one of the way that we talked about at lunchtime was to view it from that way of the trauma that they've received inside the centres. They're such broken people, and perhaps even that little bit of communication that you have can draw the wrong kind of relationship with the victims. Sometimes it's better in situations to pass them off first, so that their first real connection is someone like us who can tell them, like, I know everything about their rooms they're in, I know everything about the torture, I know everything about, I know victims that they will know, I can name people that are living in rooms beside them, I know their bosses, I know their, and because you have that much information, they're like, okay, I can trust this guy because he knows the problems, he knows what we're going through.
For A21, I first want to clarify that the way our Recover program is structured, the model that we do intervention, we don't initiate rescues. We rather collaborate with law enforcement and social services during the identification process. So that means that someone else or an entity who has that capability of investigation or negotiation or extraction or whatever to get a survivor out, we are on the receiving end once they come out. And with that, our trust begins during that identification process, and then we build rapport with the survivors of trafficking throughout the process, whether it's throughout that initial screening, interviews, identification, protection, repatriation, so on and so forth. Like what Judah said, rapport and having that one person being with the point of contact is important. And we see that not only in victims of forced criminality, but also in aftercare services for other types of trafficking.
Thank you so much. Now I want to kind of widen the scope a little bit. Of course, that when it comes to victim survivor support and rescue, it's not only ideally, it's not the job of NGO. It should be from law enforcement and government. But the situation is actually it's a lot of NGOs supporting this, and the government not necessarily doing their job. But still, because the issue is so cross-border and international, even for example, just in the context of Thailand and Myanmar, or for example, the fact that victims are coming from multiple different countries. How do you navigate those, crossing border elements? What kind of challenges does it pose when it comes to, let's say, survivor repatriation, or the fact you have to communicate with, let's say, different government officer around those areas?
Right. Well, for A21, what we see is the victims who are lured into the scam compounds often have visas that are invalid, and that with that challenge, crossing borders, coming into Thailand, without a valid visa, it could cause immigration problems. For A21, we find that working with embassies and communicating these challenges and requesting a temporary passport or temporary travel document for these survivors will be helpful, especially during the screening process. It helps the immigration to know that the embassies of these survivors are involved, they're aware, and they are taking active steps to mitigate other risks like being seen as someone who's entering a country illegally.
It's changed over the last several years on and how I view this and how the operations have worked. So in earlier years, the countries, the world, like I expressed before, had no clue what was going on. And so they were ill prepared for an influx of people even coming back from the scam compounds after they were out. And so in a lot of ways, we did a lot of more stealthy work. We did it under the table, nobody knew. But as law enforcement, as Thailand in particular, from my area, have developed better ways and better processes, then it is better for us to work with local law enforcement, but bring in their embassies as much as we can. And we talked about in one of the other groups about education for embassies. Often in our cases, like I said, we have over 62 countries represented, and I work specifically with about 25 embassies. Of those embassies, not all actually accept that they're victims of human trafficking, nor are they willing to support the victims once they come out. So that's a very delicate situation that we have. And then, of course, when we have a victim that is negotiated to come out of the scam compound, whether they paid a ransom or we've leveraged some kind of leveraged in some way in order to get the victims to be liberated from the scam compounds, we are left with the issue that they are to be smuggled from one country to another, which is completely illegal. And so that is very difficult because we cannot be complicit in the smuggling of humans, although I would say, I'm doing it for the right reasons. The government does not look at smuggling a human for the right reasons as being a legitimate excuse. And so it is a struggle that we have on a day-to-day basis. How do we liberate a victim that's standing at a scam compound and now has an illegal act that needs to take place in order for them to get to the next step of freedom? It is an extremely difficult, complicated series of events that have to take place. And we, as an NGO, have to keep our hands off it as much as possible because we could be prosecuted for smuggling of victims, and then that's not going to help anyone if I end up in jail for a lifetime. So it's a complicated process, but the more that we work, the more we realize that leaning on law enforcement is the way forward, and we've done it because we've had to press the law enforcement in what the right way to do it is. And I'm sure so many of you can raise your hands in this room saying we as an organization in our area, in our sphere, have had to push governments from doing things wrong to doing things right. And it's not that they necessarily wanted to do it wrong, it's that this is new. It's unknown, it's unheard of, it's not prepared. They're also running at a rate of trying to figure out what's going on, and you know the bureaucracy makes things slower and harder. So it's now that we're pushing them to continue to say this is the right way to do it, this is the right way to do it, and there's new policies that are written. We partner now from law enforcement to government agencies to NGOs in order to try to bring about I guess, a trauma-informed way of getting people home. But it does come with its issues because there is illegal acts that need to take place in order for the best interest of the victim. And that in itself is just such a complex role.
Yeah, I think I would also just add a little bit on in terms of sometimes what we realize is that even within one government, they may not necessarily having very good communications between different departments. So you may realize like Department A is not talking to Department B and they parallel coming to you, or like they are requesting certain things that's almost opposite. So that's another element that's quite tricky when it comes to, I guess, working with survivors. I think I want to just explore a little bit more around also the survivor profile, victim profile. So we touch upon a little bit on how the educational background is quite different. Many of them have a bit more like a higher educational background. Can you give any examples or any traits that's wider than just the educational part? Thuy, would you like to start first?
as I mentioned in my presentation, there's some trait of the victim coming back from the scam compound that we think that the 5 traits that I mentioned already, but the thing that I would like to share that how we build the system to support the survivor, especially for the male victim, because many years ago, especially before the COVID, the majority of the survivor coming back are the women and the children. So the whole system we design to fit with the women and the children. So for example, like the local social worker network in the grassroots level, is many of them are the women. But now we are facing the increasing the male survivors, so it means that we have to social worker, the male social worker to work with the male victim. So the first, the additional trait that I would like to add to.
Yeah, we have the same statistics. Over 80% of our victims are male that are coming back. As I said in my opening, that education plays a huge role in who was being targeted for the scam centres, and so it's not normal for a scam victim to come out and they've got a PhD in some kind of level of education, and so it makes victim identification interesting. It makes it complex. Victims know much more about what their rights are, much more about what should be, how they should be treated, and that becomes complex because the government system that will accept them as victims of human trafficking is still a little bit behind. And so what they know is their rights, that they should be treated in this way, and yet they're facing prison time once they've been rescued because of an immigration violation. It's hard to explain to, well, it's not hard to explain, it's hard for an educated person to accept that I'm going to go to jail for something that I had no part in playing, and I'm a victim, yet I'm going to have a criminal record to go forward. And that's such a complex kind of scenario that each victim has within the scam compounds. It's, like I said many times, it's just something that the world was not ready for. We didn't understand, we didn't know, and so we're still learning and we're still progressing as it comes. Mina wants to ask about the victim identification. So of course she raised that there was 4 different types of victims within scam compounds, and I 100% agree with her findings. We could probably build it up and make 10 different, but it's easy to look at 4. So you have a victim that goes in, they had no clue of what it was. When they learnt, they refused to do it and they needed to get out. Then you have victims that go in and they had no clue, but once they learnt they were going to be, locked up and that they didn't want to do it, but then the beatings were so bad, they decided to become complicit to survive. In my experience, I've not walked in their shoes of what it's like to be with your legs broken, your fingers broken, your nose broken in order to be forced to work 17 hours a day. I don't know how I would react, but I actually think I would probably go to work. I would put my head down and I would probably be the best scammer there was, because I would not want to live that. And in a documentary that I was in with Jason Towers, they interviewed a young African man and they asked him, about escape and about whatever. And I just remember this one line that he said at the end of the documentary, and he said, "I know what the price that I had to pay was, and I wasn't prepared to pay it." And it was the idea that it was his life. He was going to have to die in order for him to escape. And he was like, "I'm not ready to pay it," so he works. And so you've got this second kind of victim that comes out and you're like, you were complicit, you earned money, but of course it was an act of survival. And then you've got, the person who knew what scamming was, and they've scammed in other areas of the world where they've been quite good. And there's some scam compounds, you can go out at night, you can have a separate life, you can go to restaurants and dinner, and then they come to the scam compounds in Myanmar and they realize they're locked in a hole and they're tortured, and they're like, this isn't what I bargained for. And so we still look at identifying them as a victim, because although scamming is the crime, yet they were still victimized and exploited. So they are still trafficked into a job that they did not agree to. And so we look at those as a whole, and I think it's turned upside down what we thought victim identification was, which is why the NRM system, the National Referral Mechanism system, has been so difficult, because it's been based off labor, forced labor regulations, and so the check boxes have to do with forced labor, which is so different than what forced criminality has been. And so we've been trying to push the governments of the world to look at these NRMs and to change some of the questions that would have to do with identifying victims of human trafficking for forced criminality, which looks very different than what forced labor and those kind of things have been.
Yes, and to add to that a little bit, I think with the victim profiles and the things that they were forced to do in order to survive, having a strong understanding of trafficking indicators, of what criteria are trafficking, and advocating that, and help others who are active in this space have the capacity to also see these situations as exploitative, as trafficking situation, rather than just someone who is a willing participant because they want to do it. The victims that we have worked with, the survivors that we work with, are in the situations that you described. They are educated. They are able to tell what is exploitation and what is not. However, the recruitment method is so sophisticated. Social engineering is on turbo, especially with AI helping making these false job opportunities that they are being lured into. There's almost no difference between a job posting for a legitimate employment opportunity and versus these scam centers. So it's very hard to tell these days. There are unwilling participants, people who are tricked into these situations and are coerced and are shown, they're shown the alternative, the consequences if they don't comply. So, like I said, having strong understanding of trafficking, the criteria, and the capacity I think would be helpful to navigate this as it grows, as it stay on.
Thank you so much for all the challenges. That's very, very real and genuine. Just maybe also add a few words. Like we have seen, for example, survivors who have PhDs, who's able to speak like several languages, or who even worked with UN before, who's an engineer, who can do coding. So it's extremely different than the traditional kind of profile that people imagine. Now we have final few minutes. I just want to make sure we open the floor, and if there's any burning questions, you can, okay, please.
Hello. Okay, this was an incredible session. Thank you so much for that. I have a question regarding the identification process, because different organizations working with the law enforcement agencies for the identification of victims. So, do you think that the law enforcement agencies officers have enough knowledge regarding the human trafficking? They have enough knowledge regarding the human trafficking. They identify the right person, that this is the victim of human trafficking.
Of course. What we see is government taking actions to increase understanding of trafficking. I know that there are people who go around the country, at least in Thailand, to do these trainings and capacity buildings. And like what Judah has said before, this is such a new trend that people are catching up. People are responding rather than, nobody saw this coming. So people are slowly building capacity.
In 2022, I would say that no, their governments weren't equipped, but we have had many trainings through UNODC, IOM, and other stakeholders that have done very good training, specifically in Thailand. Thailand do know the process. They have a good process. The problem is the process is quite long, and that's what really hurts the victims. It's not so much that the process is broken. It's that the process is a 30 to 45 day process before they go home. And that's got nothing to do with whether they know how to register them as victims of human trafficking or not. I think the other issue is that there are still nations in the world that don't consider the scamming centers as being victims of human trafficking. And that doesn't have to do with whether they can or can't identify a victim. It has to do with bias and individual people's bias on whether they're going to accept it or not. So I think the training has been there. I think that they're well versed in it, and we've been very successful now in registering victims of human trafficking through the legal system, law enforcement system in Thailand. But one of the problems is personal bias plays a major role in whether they do or don't. And in a sense, what sometimes governments, their home countries, might pressure them in choosing not to be identified as victims of human trafficking because they think it's an easier role, or again, they don't agree with it, their home countries. So I think, I hope that answers your question that in terms of that, but I think Cambodia is a different thing altogether. So I think, Cambodia.
So in the context of the Vietnam, actually the NGO is not involved in the identification process, but we too have to organize the training for the police or border guard about the identification process, and there are things. I'd like to say a bit about that, how we try to involve government in the strengthen the identification process. That it's a part of the law reform. That I share in my presentation that the law reform has started 2 or 3 years ago in the country, and we try to mobilize all the relevant department of the government, try to working hard. Get the voice of all the NGO to build in the law, and we really focus on how the identification being able to process. And the challenge for the Vietnam government is that the process of identify the victim, it also involves in the identify the trafficker, and in the context of the scam compound, that many trafficker is not physically inside of the country. They always in the overseas. So it take, like Judah mentioned, it take more time, it's longer time to the process to happen. Yep.
I know we are a bit over time, but just at least one more question, so we can still,
Okay, thank you so much for the wonderful session. So as Judith said, that the AI and technology used by the scamming compounds are way more advanced, but which method do you use in the preventive initiatives in the midst of rapid technological advancement that makes online scamming is more difficult to detect? Thank you.
how technologies are used, how.
I've actually been speaking on the preventative measures recently with different governments, and we have this idea that perhaps some of the measures of prevention need to be analog. We've swung so far on the pendulum to be so centered on technologies, and perhaps we don't have the capabilities to counter them in the technological world, but that we could have the abilities in the analog world. And by that, I'll suggest this. Almost every victim of human trafficking that comes in goes to an embassy and applies for a visa to enter the transit country and then be moved into Myanmar. During that time, could you imagine if you actually got a flyer put in your passport at the embassy that when you had it back, it said your job that you're applying for is illegitimate? that you are being scammed, go to these websites, look at these news articles, do some due diligence. Perhaps it might not stop everyone, but it might stop some. And that's such a simple thing. Or when they go to immigration and they pass through an immigration officer and they go, you're here for a transit visa, but if you are thinking you have a job, here's a flyer for you. It's a piece of paper that could be handed out in different points of contact in the back of a seat pocket of an aeroplane where we know those flights are being are the main routes of trafficking from Dubai to transit countries. Could it be on the back of an aeroplane pocket? Could it be on the bins of the aeroplane above the heads advertising human trafficking for forced criminalities into scam centers? So we've looked at ways that perhaps we go back in time, and it's got to be something a little bit more grassroots in the way that we look into measuring it, because we've talked about how we can combat in technology, and it just seems that it's running, afield. But I will say this, we do have a lot of support in like the meta atmosphere. A lot of the major giants are playing roles, and if we flag things to some of these major companies, they will shut down pages for us, they will shut down accounts. We are able to go to wallet companies of cryptocurrency and highlight these names and information, because you need a passport to open a wallet. We find that a lot of victims have fake wallets opened on their passports that were stolen from them in the scam compounds. If we get that passport, we can send it to those wallet companies and they'll actually shut down those wallets. So there are ways in which we're using technology in order to try to prevent or stop what's happening. But I think as a whole, I want to explore the idea of going back to perhaps what we would have done in the 80s and 90s to prevent this, because that might be what the world needs at the moment.
Great. An hour just flies so fast, and I believe that we have all done something and very difficult sometimes the conversation, and also very real challenges that really facing by the three organizations. So I think it's been really, really amazing, deep conversation. And tonight we're also going to have a dinner together. So if you are interested in continuing this conversation, welcome to join us. And you can find the event on your Uhuba app. And also we are still here tomorrow, so please come and grab us, and we will be very happy to continue this conversation with you. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for all the three amazing speakers.